Okay, welcome everybody. Good evening. I'm Arlene Schuler, and I'm President and CEO of New York City Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you all tonight to this really special event. I think to have the two gentlemen we have today talking about dance and Sleeping Beauty and their art is just a rare occurrence, and so we're so thrilled that both of you could take the time. Alistair just got in from Europe, and Matthew's been going to every performance, so they're pretty probably tired, so we're really very grateful to you. I also want to thank Nicole Seligman, who's one of our board members, who graciously gave us this beautiful space tonight in this cocktail reception, and I'm afraid you two have to compete with the background, which is pretty spectacular. I'm not going to do a formal bio about either of these two gentlemen. I'll just say that Matthew is considered one of the UK's probably most popular choreographers. When Sleeping Beauty opened at Sadler's Wells last December for 8 weeks in a 1,600 seat theater, it was sold out 98% before it even opened. And of course, every performance sold out. And his Swan Lake, which is coming back to London in December, was at City Centre 2010, has been performed for 15 years now or more?
18.
18 years. He's extraordinary. And of course, he's done Broadway, and he's done The Nutcracker, and many other works. But and beyond that, he cares about education. And he's a really wonderful person, and I'm glad to have gotten to know him all these years. So that's Matt. And Alistair Macaulay probably needs no introduction in this group. He has been the chief dance critic at the time since 2007, and has been was a writer, a critic in London before that, although he did do subbed at the New Yorker for a period of time. He's also written a book on Margot Fonteyn, and he has done a collection of interviews with Matthew. So they have known each other for a long time, and Alistair is very familiar with his work. I am going to read something which is going to embarrass you, if you don't mind, just because I thought it was so great. So this appeared in Ballet Magazine by Alan Helms. Do you know this?
I think I do.
It says that he quickly established himself, since he's been in New York, as the leading dance critic of our time. And this is, I'm quoting now. He occupies this eminence not only because of his position at the Times, but also because of the overall excellence of his writing. He brings to the job of critic an unusual array of talents, combining a scholar's knowledge of dance history, a discriminating eye, a sensitivity to music, a phenomenal memory, and a voracious appetite for all forms of dance. Writing as comfortably about tap, hip-hop, tango, Michael Jackson, as about traditional ballet and modern dance. And I think that really sums up Alistair's amazing abilities, all of which are tested in Fall for Dance, where he has to look at everything. And I will just say one thing, that several months ago, actually it was in April, Alistair, along with David Vaughn, who is here, and Robert Greskovich, did this remarkable lecture at the New York Public Library on Sleeping Beauty. And anyone who was there to see it was privileged, with clips from the collection, and their knowledge of the piece and the dancers was really extraordinary. So when we thought about doing this, we thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have Alistair's insights, not only into Matthew's work, but in Sleeping Beauty, to share with you. And they are repeating it next week?
November 12th.
November 12th. So it's, if you can go there and see this lecture, it's extraordinary. And that, no further ado, Alistair and Matt, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When we were talking about this evening, Arlene was asking if there were any things we like about the place, and Matthew said, yes, I'd like music playing. I'd like some music from the ballet, from Sleeping Beauty playing. I think it was my choice to have some of the vision scene straight away. I haven't seen this production in New York of Matthew's Sleeping Beauty. I mean, I saw this production, but in England. I saw it twice in January and once in February. And I remember very clearly from when we had dinner how proud you were of certain things, like in the vision scene, that you used the whole of the vision scene music, which is perhaps the longest single block of poetic dance music in the whole ballet. But having said that, but when I first went to see it, of course, I was really nervous. Because I know Sleeping Beauty extremely well. Matthew and I, by the way, we go back to 1982, and apart from other things, we used to meet as regulars in what the English call the gods. That's the cheap seats at Covent Garden. It would be at the very top at Covent Garden, by the coffee bar at every intermission, and we'd talk with great opinion about each performance, and we saw Sleeping Beauty, the old Royal production, a great many times. Well, I know my Sleeping Beauty. And I get anxious when these newfangled choreographers sweep in and do that. So the first time I saw it at Sadler's Wells, it began with the conventional overture, and then it straight away went into music from Act One.
Yes.
Was that on purpose, so as to wrong-foot us, so that we wouldn't start getting into the groove?
Not really, no. It wasn't. I would never do something for that reason. It was to try and parallel the idea of the baby Aurora and the grown-up Aurora with the same music. So you got a sense that the personality, because we tried to give the baby Aurora personality by using a puppet, rather than the sort of dead bundle in a cot, you know, that you usually get. And so I wanted this parallel to go on, and musically it needed to be quite busy music, or music that the baby could misbehave to, you know. And the stately music that actually begins the prologue just didn't feel right either. So I found a way of segueing into it, and very few people actually notice, because I managed to find a note that was the same note as the one that goes into at a point in that introduction. And when it was first presented to our conductor, Brett Morris, he was very against any idea of this to begin with. And I said, look, I think I've found a place where it can work. Isn't this the same note here? Couldn't it just segue here? And he went, yes, you're right. It can. So I was very pleased about that, because I think it's important for the storytelling, and that's always the reason why things are done. I'd never do anything to wrong foot people, I don't think.
I've got a but coming up about that, but I'm not going to go into that straight away. One of the ways Matthew and I, when we did our book of interviews, found was we have very different kinds of minds, despite knowing each other for ages. One is that I've got a very fiddly mind full of detailed memory. Matthew cheerfully forgets whole areas of his own past. And sometimes, after one case with Swan Lake, I found out an important thing 4 months into researching our book. And he walked in and he said, I had to say, you never told me you choreographed the Dying Swan before you did the Swan.
No, I forgot. That's your job, though, to find these things out.
Going on about structure, Sleeping Beauty, though, you alternate in the first half between music from the prologue and Act One.
Yes.
And then after the interval or intermission, the music alternates between music for Acts 2 and 3. Would you have ever thought of swapping more between the two halves of the ballet?
No, I didn't. I tried to be as...
Because Act 2 is where the 100-year sleep has happened.
Yes, I tried to be as authentic as I could be, within reason, because I wanted to try and tell the story that the music was telling. You know, so I didn't obviously want to give the wrong themes to the wrong characters. If it's Carabosse music, it's Carabosse. If it's Lilac, it's Lilac. I wasn't going to mess around with that. All the changes that happened musically were all done for story reasons. As the story developed, they were the reasons why something would feel better a little later in the act, or a little earlier, or this wasn't working particularly, this idea. I did record more music than I used, because there was a certain amount of uncertainty in the last act as what pieces we would use and wouldn't use. And I wasn't really clear at the time, so we had to, because it was all recorded for us before we started rehearsals. So, yeah, decisions that were mostly made for story reasons. And the biggest changes actually are the two big pas de deux that happen, not where they normally happen, I believe. They're much sort of later in each act. In Act 1, the Rose d'Arge, which is a pas de deux, sorry, it isn't a pas de deux in the ballet, but it's a pas de deux in our piece. It's much later in the act. And it's partly because I found in listening to it, I found a sense of something I wasn't expecting in the music, which I was searching for, because I found it one of the most difficult pieces to approach. I found a sense of tragedy in it towards the end. I felt something happened at the end. If I blocked away the idea of balances and things, which we all know and love, I heard something in the music that felt like something happened that was potentially tragic, and that's when she pricks her finger in our ballet. And I used that dramatically, and I thought that was a great thing for me to find, because I'm happier when there's something dramatic going on as well. And that music was not giving it to me initially, because I was too strongly associating it with what I already knew of it.
My mind's jumping so many different ways as you're talking, but I suppose I should just broaden the discussion, which is just talk about Tchaikovsky. I think you may be the only person in history who's choreographed all 3 Tchaikovsky ballets.
Do you really think so? I don't know.
Well,
what an achievement. Great. I'm very happy about it. I certainly felt good once I'd finished the last one, and it felt like an achievement. It really did.
I mean, it seemed astonishing that you did Swan Lake in the first place. Nutcracker
was first, yeah.
Which is, 21 years ago or something?
Yes, that's right.
Then Swan Lake, which certainly I did not think you had it in you to do, I'm sorry to say, and was I wrong? But I certainly remember from then on, you kept saying, I keep listening to the music from Sleeping Beauty, but I just don't think it's for me. Which I think, well, we can now see, of course, that really meant I'm determined to find a way.
I was regularly coming back to it every year or so, every couple of years in that time. It's a long time since Swan Lake. 18 years was the last one, and then this one. And I had regularly thought, let's listen to it again and try and see what happens, see what comes up in my mind. And of course, it wasn't that it wasn't for me, because I loved it. But it felt overly grand. It felt I couldn't get the associations with classical dance out of my head when I listened to it. There were lots of very undramatic grand music sometimes, and that's different from Swan Lake for me. Swan Lake always had this sort of driving narrative in it. But as I looked into the score more, I found more and more music that I could feel in a dramatic way, and I could find a story within. So it was, in the end, actually, I made myself do it without an idea, a strong idea. It was our 25th anniversary of my company last year, and excuse me, I thought this is the perfect way to celebrate it, to do the 3rd Tchaikovsky ballet, and I knew that would be a great thing to finish the year with. So I kind of made myself do it, and I've told this story before, but I was in Russia, I was in Moscow with our production of Cinderella, and I was taken to Tchaikovsky's house, his country home, and it was standing there in his bedroom with the sheet music on this little wooden table and this little simple single bed, where I just said to myself, that's what I'm going to do next. And I went back to the company that day and I said, we're doing Sleeping Beauty next. But I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. But I knew I had 10 weeks stretching ahead of me after this season as a summer break. And I thought, I'm just going to research. I'm going to watch all productions. I'm going to research the ballet. I'm going to read all the versions of the story I can find. I'm going to read all the analysis of the fairy tale. And gradually things started to...
Do you remember which versions of the story you read?
Well, there's the Grimm, obviously. There's some interesting versions. I found a book by Pamela Travers, for example, that's just about Sleeping Beauty, not the ballet, the story. She writes a whole essay about it, and then tells her version of the story in her words. Who wrote Mary Poppins? P.L. Travers. And that was a surprise, because I'd worked on the Broadway show and the West End show, and I didn't know that she had this love for it. So that was interesting. And lots of studies of... There's many, many versions of it. And of course, if you're doing Sleeping Beauty, the ballet is what you have to look to, because the structure of it is not like any of the story versions, because you've got this vision scene, which isn't in any other version. It's a ballet idea. So I had to use that as my script, in a sense, and decide whether I was going with that or against it. But I found more and more things about it that I loved as I went along the timeline, and the good versus evil aspect to it. I wanted to very much tell a fairy tale still. I didn't want to change that aspect. We were very much in a fairy tale place, fairy tale logic. And I asked myself questions like, what isn't working for me about this? And it was never really, not the music completely, it was the story as well. It didn't feel much happened. And I wanted a love story that you felt something for. And I know when I said this to you, Alistair, about I just don't buy the prince waking her up if she's not met, and they're instantly in love and then they get married. This is what happens in the band. You said you believed in love at first sight, I remember.
I've forgotten that.
And
but I do.
Yeah. So, but I just didn't feel an audience, the sort of audience that we play to would buy that. And I wanted to have a love story across time. And how could they be together with this 100-year sleep? So this is how the story developed. Yeah.
How early on, say, did you think of some of the extraordinary twists you put into the Sleeping Beauty, like vampires?
Well, everyone goes on about the vampires, and but probably I don't read review. I haven't seen any, but I'm sure all the headlines are things to do with vampires. Well, we'd already decided to set it in 1890 at the beginning, when the music was written. That was a good choice, I thought, to begin it. And, of course...
You said we'd always... Was that in your idea the moment you knew you were going to do the ballet when you were at Tchaikovsky's room? Or did you know it even before then?
Soon after that, I think, I thought I had to work out what periods we were going to do the piece in, because there is this... that was one of the most exciting things about it, in many ways, is that you can reflect different periods within the piece. And so 1890 seemed to be perfect, because it actually eventually, luckily, brought us up to almost the present day. And that was one of the reasons why I really wanted to do the piece initially, I think, was those timelines. Yeah.
When you're working on preparing the music, I suppose you're constantly trying to look for this. Are you looking for a story push, drive toward the music, even more than a dance element? I ask particularly with this one because this is your danciest work so far, and you were determined to stage just about all the suite of the prologue dances and all the suite of the vision dances.
Yeah, I'm often led into saying that because it's what people think they want me to say in some ways. That it's all about story, it's all about plot, it's all about character. And to a certain extent that's true, but you're right. There are sections in the show which I kind of really enjoyed doing and revelled in, really, that are pure dance with an idea, like the sleepwalking scene, which is our vision scene, or the fairy solos, or the fairy material. So, as long as I've got a strong idea of some aspect of the story, it doesn't have to be that everything is about moving the story forwards. It could be an atmosphere, you know, and that's one of the things that this gave me, really, partly because of the music leads you to that, and the music is very clearly defined into, for me anyway, music that's to be danced to, and some music that you can actually do a scene to, or tell a story, to have more storytelling moments, like in Nutcracker. There's a difference.
When I was interviewing you, when it was 8-9 years ago, about Edward Scissorhands, I remember saying, for me, there's a problem straight away of how do you choreograph Scissorhands, and you said that's the hook. And when you're a choreographer, you need the hook, you need the challenge. Think, what's going to be the problem? And that is the problem that makes it an interesting task to choreograph. Which I love, and actually connected to something I was just reading about Balanchine today, who just said, I set myself challenges.
Yes.
And I'm sure it's true of many other of the great choreographers. Are you conscious of what the challenge was with Sleeping Beauty?
Well, you've already mentioned it in a way. The challenge was those suites of music that you have in each act, and to try and, as much as possible, to pull them off, because it's not what I'm best at, it's not what I'm known for, and that was my challenge, really. And working with great dancers that I work with, and all the people you see here in City Centre are the people who created the piece with me. That's really was the challenge for me. I said, right, we're going to do all the fairy variations, we're going to do the whole vision scene, and that was my challenge in that piece, I think, to make that work, because then there are points where the story does kind of stop. I didn't do it so much in Act 3, which is the wedding scene. I think I keep more plot going there, but even so, there are moments where it's just there for dance reasons. So that was my challenge, I think, in this piece.
I mean, it occurs to me, looking at the company as I saw it in January and February, you've now got your most, I don't like the word polished, but it's the best word that comes to a group of dancers you've ever had. And I remember so well, in the 90s, you said that, I'm not sure I should tell this story, but the person who was your original Nutcracker prince in your first Nutcracker in 92 went off to do other dancing, came back to you, and you said it's only about 3 or 4 years have passed, but actually we would hardly give him a job in the core of our Swan Lake now, because the level of the dancers had risen so much.
Yes, it's true.
Well, now it's risen surely more, because I wouldn't think many of your Swan Lake dancers could have done the dancing you give those prologue men and women.
That's right. The standard, it's because the company is a company that people want to be in, for one thing. So the choice is greater. Like when we first did Swan Lake, we could just about find 14 swans, male swans, to be in it. You know, and that was a struggle. Now we have hundreds of applications to be in that show, and it's a lot of young men's ambition to be in the show. It's the reason they started dancing, and this is an amazing turnaround, you know, for us. So, but also with this company as well, they're there because they want to be part of a creative process. They feel challenged in that way. They get to perform in a different way. You know, they get to create characters. A lot of them are interested in their acting as much as their dancing. And we've developed the company in a way to keep our standards up. You know, some people think of us as it's a show, you know, but actually we're a dance company, and we do class every day like any dance company, and we've got very high standards. There's no excuses for not doing class and things like that. These things have changed over the years, but we're now very, we want our standards to be as high as possible, absolutely.
So when you're rehearsing a Sleeping Beauty like this, and you're saying, say, to the 6 dancers who are going to do those prologue roles, we're really going to do dancing, which means that they're not going to do necessarily the more dramatic material that the Swan Lake dancers would want to join your company for. Are you pushing them out of their comfort zone, or are you choosing dancers who you know this will release?
I think they're always going to bring personality to it, and this is something I feel maybe that's been lost in the ballet itself. You know, when I've seen it, when I watched the very earlier versions of it, I could see more personality in the solos, in the variations. You could see the dancer's personality come through more, and I think I would always pick people who are going to do that. And we did start to find characteristics for those solos, but really, I think they revelled in it, because it has upped the standard to another level. You're right, with having the challenge of doing a solo. I don't do solos very often, you know, unless it's a part of a dramatic situation. But to have to deliver a solo, and that's a very specific thing about a variation, which has to be very precise and full of wit and interest, and that was the challenge for them as well as performers, and they've really honed them down now to the point where they take great pride in them.
Has that changed or developed your musicality, having to listen to that amount of detail in a Tchaikovsky score for a dance?
I just find it it so tells you what to do, the music, the orchestration, the detail. And in the studio, what I would do, I'd have my headset on during breaks. I just listen to the bit we're going to be working on again and again, and I hear all the different things that are in the music and the different things I want to bring out. And I tend to be very specific about that. But I find Tchaikovsky the easiest in many ways because of that, because it's so layered and I use it very much in the creation of the movement. Absolutely, I don't create movement and then put that on top of the music. Often my ideas that go into it come directly from the music, rather than something that's just a happy happenstance or whatever you say. You know, which I think some choreography is sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, it just sort of it sort of works, but it's more specific, I'd say.
I realise I've been jumping again. I want you to talk about how other aspects of how you prepare a show like Sleeping Beauty. I happen to know, I think maybe long before your rehearsal period, you needed to look at as many alternative productions of the traditional ballet on DVD as possible.
Yeah.
Since you're going to do something that isn't a traditional Sleeping Beauty, what do you get out of watching the Kirov, the Bolshoi, 2 or 3 different royal productions?
Part of me just needs to know what has been done before and what music is used or not used, because it feels then I have permission to do what I want to do. Maybe, you know, I feel, well, that production didn't do that and this production did, and that makes me feel better about working with it. And I feel as though I need to know everything that's gone before if I'm going to approach such a piece. But one of the interesting things I found was the difference, how it's changed over the years, and mainly to do with music and tempi, which I thought was extraordinarily different. And the Royal Ballet version in 1978 and the Royal Ballet version which I saw recently is that it couldn't be more different. It's so slow now. Everything is so slow. So the version that we fell in love with, I think, or that I certainly did, and around that time, the late 70s, 80s, early 80s, I was so happy to see it again. To see this production, which you'd almost forgotten that it could be that witty and that driven. And it was Ashton and de Valois' production, I believe. Yeah. And you could feel what they'd put into it. It was fast moving. It had moments of humour. It was characterful. It didn't let up. There was a real story there. And now it's, I think, a little bit set in aspic, and it's very, very slow. So that was good in a way to have seen that and to remember that, and to then be able to create the score from that drive of how it was originally created, I think.
Am I right that you discovered the same thing about Swan Lake, that when you were doing Swan Lake, that most people's Swan Lakes are just much too slow now, the more you examine the music?
Yeah, I think so, because often the question to me is about going against tradition and all that kind of thing, you know, that I've done in the pieces I've done. And I sometimes counter that by saying, well, actually, our music is a bit more authentic than the ballet is now, because the music is actually more as written. The tempis are more as written. So there is an authenticity there, which you don't get in the classical ballet anymore. And all those lots of applause and everything that you get. That's why it can be so long sometimes.
Yeah, are there
Endless
breaks for applause in your Sleeping Beauty? I can't remember.
We don't stop for it, no. If it gets applause, like the variations, if they get applause, they get applause. If they don't, it just carries on. And that came from listening to a recording of, I think it was a Constant Lambert one, where he plays them one after another really quickly with hardly a gap between them. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Maybe that's a way of doing it. Because I couldn't imagine us as a company coming forwards and taking bows after solo. I just couldn't. It's just not what we do. So I thought, well, that's interesting. It's a suite of characters. You know, it's what Tchaikovsky wrote, I think.
When did you decide to bring the element of class into this Sleeping Beauty and make her not fall in love with the prince?
Ah, yes. Well, that's interesting, because she isn't actually a princess in our version. She's as a child, for those of you who have not seen it yet, it does say at the beginning, she's acquired for the king and queen by Karabos. Karabos, in our version, I made this up, it's not for any other version. The king and the queen sort of go to the dark side in a way with Karabos to get a child. They can't have children. And she gets them a child. And you don't really know where from or how or whose child she is, but she's different. And so she is more naturally attracted to a commoner, and she sort of falls into just a childhood sweetheart who is the sort of groundsman or the gamekeeper or whatever of the country palace. And, you know, that was... it's a little similar to Swan Lake in some ways, you know, with the girlfriend and things like that. But it's that thing of playing with class is always good, because I think the audience roots for that character a little bit more, you know, rather than just a lot of princes and princesses. You know, I think the idea that she's in love with this nice guy, you know, I think is you want him to succeed and you want her to succeed.
You weren't tempted by all the modern popularity of Will and Kate to do that royal?
Well, it's odd that all happened, you know, the baby and everything was announced after our...
No, but they'd got married and so forth.
Oh, they did, yeah.
So
yeah. No, well, you could do that, yeah, of course. But I think, you know, it's me sort of trying to find a story that I think people will want to follow. That's where it comes from. But interestingly, I found in my research, one of the films, of course, you have to watch is Disney. You have to watch the Disney movie because it's the one everyone knows the best now. Most of the young people who come and see it, of course, that's what they know. And I did get a question the other day from a little girl in the audience. Why did you change the story? You know, and well, what is your story? What is the story I'm supposed to have changed? But Disney actually identified the same problem with the plot, actually. And he does a similar thing but different. He gets Aurora to meet a young man in the forest who she believes is a commoner, but actually he is a prince in disguise. And so she falls in love with this young man. And he also does away with the 100 years' sleep, because he manages to save her before... She's only been asleep for a little while, and not very long at all. And people don't even notice. But he saves her very quickly, because... Otherwise, how would he be around for her? And this is where the bit I didn't explain earlier, where the vampire thing came in, purely for a plot reason, because it's like, in fairy tale terms, how does this young man, how can he be there for her? And Lilac, this turned our Lilac fairy, who is actually played by a man in our piece called Count Lilac, Clue. He, being Aurora's protector, godfather or whatever you have, he gives Leo, who is this young man, the gift, as I put it, the gift of eternal life, by biting him in the neck and turning him into a vampiric fairy. So the plot's quite complicated in the end. But I figured in a story where you're asked to accept fairies as being part of the community or a subculture or whatever, which is what happens in the ballet. After all, they're invited in. Why not vampires? It's all the same literature of that time. So it didn't seem a big stretch to me. Everyone's a little bit like vampires in Sleeping Beauty, but it's very close to what we're asked to accept in the ballet, I think. So I went off on a tangent there.
No, it's all right. My mind's going off on about 6 different tangents. One of them is simply to contradict you. You said I would never try wrong footing an audience. Actually, in a recent interview, you did say the opposite, which is that you deliberately put in the introduction music to the Rosadagio just for those people who might know what was following, and then you follow it with something that isn't the Rosadagio.
Yes, I did say that, yes.
Interviewing Matthew Bourne, you have to know the answer to the question before you ask.
That's later on in the piece, though, you know. But no, and there are so few people who watch the piece who actually are thinking that. But I like the idea that it does build up to something that the ballet fans, at least, really know terribly well. Yeah. That's going to lead into that moment, and it doesn't. No, I enjoy that. Yeah.
I mean, effectively, I think that's for me one of the reasons that the whole show works so well. I'm sitting there anxious in the overture, thinking, how is he going to solve this? And straight away you go into Act 1 music, so straight away I'm wrong-footed and I know I'm watching a different show. It's not the one it's not the usual recipe. Yeah,
yeah. Well, maybe that's a good thing. I think Monica Mason said the same thing, actually. She came to see it twice. And Monica Mason was the director of the Royal Ballet. She was also the best Carabosse ever. And so it was really interesting to hear what she had to say about it, and she said the same thing. Maybe for that reason, I don't know, but she said that she, very soon into it, she was forgetting about what she knew of it, a piece she'd spent her whole life with, and she was just drawn into the story and the characters, and enough to want to come back and see it again. So that was...
And yet, you tease yourself with little references to the original ballet. Because when I went to see it the first time, you said, look for this. Tell the audience what you've put in as little references.
Well, I hope I get them right. In the fairy variations, there are some references, and there's a bit in the ballet which I always find rather odd, where they get in a line. It's like a sort of chorus girl thing where they sort of switch their legs, and we put that in because I always found it sort of slightly amusing and surprising in the ballet. So it's a little quote. But
if you don't know the bit, it's when I think in 8 girls in the original ballet all lattice their hands like that and then come forward with their feet like that,
crisscrossing.
Yes.
Yeah. Fairy variations, we started off using the originals as a starting point. And one of the reasons for that was that I wanted to reflect the ballet in the 1890 scene, which is the first scene, because that's the period we were in. And I wanted to reflect the manners of the theatre of that time as well within it. So it seemed to make sense to present it in that way. So, and the little Petitpas quotes in there helped that. So that's why they're there. But they're some of the solos are more obvious than others. The finger variation is very clear. And interestingly, in New York, it gets a reaction, a recognition reaction, which is never had anywhere else. It starts, and the people in the audience who know the piece, you can feel the reaction to it. It's like, oh, it's the finger variation. Oh, we're already talking about it. Very knowledgeable audience.
Changing the structure in the first half you do, but you haven't changed Sleeping Beauty out of recognition. In the second half, you really do. The plot goes way into a different place, and the music goes into very surprising directions.
Yeah.
How early on did you realize how radically the story was going to change in Act 2, Part 2?
Not really early on, because the last scene, which is the wedding, I found the most difficult one to find. So I was very clear on the earlier parts, and I had an idea for how that was going to happen. But the plot of the last scene and the whole feeling of it, very late in the day, with Les, the designer, and everything, he was begging me for what costumes do I need to design for this. And I still didn't really know the order of the music during rehearsals. I was still playing around with reordering. And there were certain plot things which were difficult to resolve, so it took a long time to come. I knew I wanted the kissing, waking up moment to be something that where you are wrong-footed, literally, because I knew there was a moment for when he goes to kiss her and wake her up that it's not her in the bed. I knew that was a great theatrical bit that I had to have in there. I didn't quite know how to get there. But sometimes you have a moment you know is a good moment, and you want to try and make it work, and the plot can almost work its way around that. And it kept me up late at night and a lot of cold sweats trying to work it out, because the time was ticking by, to finish the piece. And eventually we came up with what is essentially is the most different section. It's dark and menacing and threatening, almost. I mean, who would have thought, to that, the wedding, which is normally the sweetest, part of the whole piece. But it felt it needed it somehow. And the idea that possibly she was going to marry the wrong man, again, seemed a good plot idea.
That's something you do in your Nutcracker. Am I right? Your Nutcracker's never been seen in New York?
That's right.
It's been seen in America, but not New York. For those of you who haven't seen it, therefore, the weird thing about his Nutcracker, normally in Nutcracker is early on you know that the Grand Pas de Deux is going to happen between either Sugar Plum Fairy and her cavalier, or in other productions by the young heroine and her partner, and they've grown up together. In Matthew's production, the right man is getting married to the wrong girl right throughout Act 2, and the tension builds because you don't want this to happen, and they go on right through the Grand Pas de Deux music.
Yeah.
And you were talking early on about the element of tragedy that you found suddenly in the Rosa d'Adagio, which is an extraordinary way to hear music that is normally completely joyous and triumphant.
Yeah.
That's what you did in Nutcracker, because while Nutcracker right and Miss wrong doing all their Cupid love story down there, and the Cupids don't want it to happen, but our heroine, on top of this huge Busby Berkeley wedding cake, looks down in horror, and just at the point in the music that you reveal is most tragic, suddenly there she is, absolutely devastated, and it makes you hear Tchaikovsky's music in a different way. I don't say necessarily the only right way, but it is extraordinary to me how you made me rehear an element of that music.
Yeah, I think that's it's very important that to find new things in the music, you know, because in many ways you're introducing this music to a lot of people through doing a piece that has such a wide audience. As Arlene was saying, you know, the audience, 8 weeks of sold-out performances at Sadler's Wells, you've got an enormous cross-section of public there who don't know the score. And you're introducing this music to them, sometimes for the first time. And I think those of us that know the ballet very well, it's they're doing Beauty again. It was all an expected experience. This is a new experience, and I'm sort of mindful of that. And that's why I try and search for those things within the music that are going to make people listen to it in a different way. And I think I have to, because I have to have a reason for doing it, because I'm doing something different with it. I have to find those things in the music.
This way that you're so interested in the audience and how it reacts and how it listens and watches is so interesting. I know with so many of your productions you need to go on watching. You're so interested in how the audience in Bristol finds certain things that the audience in London misses. New York laughs in a way that London never has, and so forth. I loved what Arlene said in her introduction about you, but I have to go further. You're not just one of Britain's most popular choreographers, you're way one of the world's most popular choreographers. It was extraordinary to me when we were working on our recent edition of the book, just doing statistics, that you had 2 companies touring the world only doing your productions for long multi-month tours, both around Britain but also around the world. You told me at one point I've never had 3 companies at the same time, but I think I found a little pocket when you had 3 companies doing nothing but Matthew Bourne choreography. Meanwhile, Mary Poppins was playing in both New York and London, of which you were both chief choreographer and co-director. And I think your My Fair Lady came back, which were your choreographer. This is pretty phenomenal. Not at least since Jerome Robbins have we had anything like this. And while I've known you, and I'm not just building this up to say how incredibly great you are at all. The point is, as I've known you, you've got more and more interest in what works for an audience.
Yes.
And analysing it.
Yeah.
And in particular, in the years I've been interviewing you, what you've got more analytical about is stories. I remember in particular you wanted me to read a book that's still on my shelves, and I still haven't read it. Is Christopher Booker's The 7 Basic Plots. You want to talk about that or other ways that you analyse narrative?
Oh, well, I mean, that book is amazing, but I mean, the whole audience thing, for me, is really key, you know, and that's the reason for the success of the productions, and we're a company that exists because people come to see us. We're not a national company that gets the money anyway, you know. We have to put, as we were saying, bums on seats. And it's so it has to appeal, you know, and there's a reason, you know, why I'm still around after all this time. I think is because of that, and it's because of thinking of the audience, and I want to tell them a story that requires no prior knowledge of dance or the story or any aspect of what it's about. So that means no scenarios in programs. Means nothing is explained ahead of time. I might throw in there some. What I tend to do now is interview myself.
Oh, you do those interviews on the program?
Yeah.
They're very good. Well done.
I write the whole thing. because I'd like the audience to have some background information, you know, and guide them towards some thoughts about the piece. But I don't believe in writing down the plot, because for an audience, I do for myself and for the company when we start. But it's crazy. I mean, you go to a movie, you're not going to read the plot before you see it, or a play even. You know, you want to be surprised. So it's important that the evening has surprises in it, and that it's legible for an audience. And it's, you know, I realise I'm working in a form which to many people is a little difficult as well. It's wordless theatre, so you have to be clear in that respect as well. And some people come expecting songs, some people expect people to speak. You know, a lot of the audience come and they don't actually know what they've come to see. So you're in a constant process of winning people over. So all those things are really important to me. And as you said, I do try and. I always sit within the audience. I know most directors don't do this. All the directors I've worked with, they hover around at the back. They go in and have a drink. They come in and watch that bit, and they go, "Well, I can't watch the opening night. You know, I can't be there." They go off and have dinner and come back later. I don't get that at all. I think you've got to be in the audience, within the audience, and feel that reaction and feel the response. Particularly early on in a new piece, because you are. I would totally react to that. I don't know how the audience is going to react until I put the piece on stage, and the audience, more than anything else, the audience guides me as to what to do with the piece and whether it's working or not, and which pieces work, which sections seem to work or not, and then we will talk about that the next day, and maybe have to rework things and. Some things large, some things small, and I do a lot of Q&As, and questions come up, and I have changed the show because of those questions. I had one a few months ago, some way into the run, at the end of the piece. I hope you've all seen it because I'll give away the ending. But Leo and Aurora have a baby, a little half fairy baby. She's got little wings. Because Leo has wings. He's got little fledgling wings. I know, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful moment. And somebody pointed out that Aurora doesn't have wings at the end. And so they say, well, right, does that mean like he's going to live forever and the baby's going to live forever, but she's now going to die, you know, and he's at some point. So why can't she live forever, you know? So I thought, well, it's an interesting point. It's a good point. In our own logic, he should be able to pass that on to her. So she now struggles under the bedclothes at the end to get these little wings. People say, "What's going on under that sheet at the end?" And I said, "Well, she's actually not what you think." But you know, that's interesting. The audiences, and sometimes the youngest people in the audience can bring up something so incredible. It happened on Edward Scissorhands with something that hadn't even occurred to me. There's a scene with Edward, who of course has got scissors for hands, and he falls in love with a picture of Kim, the teenage girl who's in the house, the people who put him up. And she's a cheerleader, and there's this sort of fantasy scene where the picture comes to life and she's dancing, she's got the pom-poms and everything. And this little boy, 6-year-old boy or something, said, does he fall in love with her because she's got funny hands like him? Because she had pom-poms for hands, you know. I just thought that was so amazing, you know, to see that. And I didn't see that. And I don't think any adult would see it in a way, but it was a child's vision, you know, and I thought that was really special. I've never forgotten that. But things can come up that will help you to develop the piece, I think, through the audience.
We probably should break quite soon, but I've certainly got one question straight away, which one of the most wonderful elements, perhaps the most wonderful, is the incredible beauty of Les Brotherston's designs that we should talk about. Now, you and he have been working together since the early 90s? Is it Highland Fling?
Nearly 20 years. Yeah, 20 years next year.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a brilliant designer in all the shows you've done together, but this is simply the most visually lovely and sensuous of all of them so far. How long did you work with him, and how do you work with him on a show like this? How much is it him just coming up with ideas out of the blue, or how much are you guiding him?
Well, he's the first person I'd go to when the idea starts to form. He's my first point of call to develop the piece, and he, or both of us, obviously, we felt this was a really important one for us. We thought it was a very important piece to get right. And we spent a lot of time on it. He put more time into this than he has on any show that he's done in recent years, I think. And the first question he asks me always is, where does the piece go in your mind? And not necessarily the plot, but the actual places it might go to. Is it inside, outside? You know, how we're approaching each of these scenes. It's more like to get an idea of what the basic set might be. Because Les always designs a set that becomes other things, but the main bulk of the set remains. So it has to sort of work for all those places he wants to go. So that's the first thing he asks. He and I discuss at length where we think the plot might go then, and he is very good on that as well. He asks the right questions. And he will often solve problems as well for me with plot. Or he will say, well, if you're doing that, that doesn't work, does it? You know, he will pick me up on things. And that's good to have that two-way thing going on. So he's very involved in that respect. Once the actual designs themselves, he will sometimes throw something at me that I wasn't expecting. Other times I'm very specific and I say I want it to look like this. I wanted the fairies to have a sort of a sense of looking like they were in a ballet. And then we've done our own sort of thing with them, but they still essentially feel like they could be in a classical ballet. There was, you know, we were going to have a forest scene, and that's why Les designed all the side panels to be mirrors, because it multiplies. So from wherever you're sitting in the auditorium, you get more, you know, because you get the reflection always. And that works very well for outdoor scenes. And the indoor-outdoor is obviously the most difficult thing, because I knew we wanted a garden party for our Act 1. But that's quite difficult. It's quite a challenge when you've got scenes that are inside as well. The other big thing that we discussed, how do you do now? How do you approach now? Is the hardest thing. And that we worried about so much. Would we have to take out the whole set and bring in something else? And we were talking about skylines and all this sort of thing, what's contemporary. And then we relaxed about it, because I said, well, look, we're not trying to say everything about now, and we're just telling our story. It's very specific. It's a wedding in this last scene. And where do you go for weddings these days? You go to a lovely old building with different fittings in it. You know, that's what you would do. So it sort of relaxed us in a way. And so, well, we don't have to create a whole different look. It's actually, we bring in some sort of neon pipes and things, and it just looks, it sort of looks like a contemporary party, basically. So all those sort of things go on, but it's a very very organic and right through to the end. And I often think people don't realise as well how that relationship and how much a lighting designer can affect a piece. You know, it really can make or break a piece, however beautiful the set is, without that other person in the picture. It can, if you see a show that's badly lit, you can see the difference. Or if you see our show when it's not as lit as well as it could be, or we haven't had enough time, you see the difference, you know. So that's another collaborator, which it comes much later, but terribly important.
Now, your lighting for this show is by
Paulie Constable,
who's worked with you once, twice before?
About 3 times before, yes. And she did Warhorse, and she does all of Cameron's shows now, and I did Oliver with her in the West End recently. So, yeah.
You know, there are times in choreography I now have come to think that a lighting designer is actually even more important than the designer. They really point the eye.
They do.
And create the space.
Yes, they reveal things to you. And often if the audience is not getting something, it's so basic. The reason they're not getting it is they can't see it. That's why. Sometimes that's to do with lighting, sometimes it's to do with the company directing you towards the thing you want people to see. But there's always a reason. It's not the audience's fault. Because often we go like, why didn't they react to that bit last night? And I said, well, actually, so-and-so moved at that point over there when they should have been still, and they were all doing that. They looked the other way.
So
They missed it.
Do you ever blame an audience?
Yeah, sometimes. I think audiences don't realise sometimes that it's a two-way thing. And if the audience is good, the show is good. The show can get better if an audience starts to give something back to the stage. I think most audiences don't know that they have that power to make the show they're about to watch better. Because I know certainly our company, if you go back in the interval, if the audience feels buzzy, they're like, oh, it's great tonight, I can't wait to get on again, and it's sort of like, it feels they're loving it. Or the opposite of that. And, they're professional, they will do a good show, whatever. But I think you get a better show if the audience gives something back. And I think you often don't think that. You sit there and you think, it's the same, isn't it, every performance? But it's not. So I like performers also are very generous with audiences, who want to give. And it's the thing I look for in auditions, first and foremost, is this, because they're not trained actors, and I can't do that in auditions with them, but it's that need to communicate through their movement and be generous about it. And that's the beginnings of acting for me with them. And that connection with audiences, I think, is terribly important.
Just one story I should tell at this stage. You were talking about, you've now got an audience that follows you. It really astounded me. Was it 4 or 5 years ago I went to see your Dorian Gray? Not its first year, it's its second season at Sadler's Wells, but I saw it twice in a day, if I remember rightly. And it was at the Saturday matinee, where Matthew's Dorian Gray is dark. It is your darkest show, is that fair to say? It's possibly your most overtly gay show. It's not just gay. It's got death and cruelty and all kinds of
lots of nasty characters,
darkness in it. And there was the Saturday matinee audience, and there were 2 ordinary London women sitting behind saying, "Yes, it's good seeing this, isn't it?" Well, I've seen his Swan Lake, of course, and I've seen his Edward Scissorhands, and I've seen his Nutcracker. You haven't seen his Nutcracker, have you? And the 2 women were comparing all the list of Matthew Bourne productions they'd seen. In other words, they were trying to catch up with everything they'd seen. Of course they'd see your Dorian Gray because they want to see everything by you. Yeah. And there you were leading them. I thought, I can't think of another artist who would be making them watch men do that on the stage. Another question, though, and this probably should be my last because we should break, which is simply, it staggers me that with even something as successful as your Swan Lake, that when we were first working on your book of interviews, you were preparing for the first New York season, and there you were sitting around with your team working on what bits you were going to change. And I was saying, this is a hit. It's run for months in the West End. After its original success at Sadler's Wells, it's toured Britain, it's already been to Los Angeles for an 8-week season, it's been to other countries, and here you are saying, we want to change things. I don't remember you saying it, but I remember one of your team just saying, well, of course we're going to change the Spanish dance because it's boring. But you were just wanted to fiddle. Are you getting like that already with your Sleeping Beauty, making mental notes of what things you might change?
Well, I always think you can do better. I hope that's true, that I'm not just tinkering for the sake of tinkering, but I always feel you can do better. So, but interestingly, with Beauty, this one came together for me sooner than any of the other shows I've done. And the changes that I wanted to make to it have been small ones along the way. There have been things, and there have been things we've worked on and changed and developed. But there's no big chunk of it that I necessarily... I have got a few things. I've got a little list, actually. Now. But it's probably because I watch it so much. There are a few bits I think next time it comes back I will work on a bit. There are some bits I could do better with. That's true. But I like to keep it fresh in that way. And I think it's great to be able to do that because I'm a living choreographer rather than something that's... that you're putting on again. Someone is very reverentially putting on a piece that if the choreographer was around, possibly would say, oh, yeah, let's do that, let's change that, let's do something different there. And I think it's the right way to keep approaching these pieces. That's my view. I know Mark Morris doesn't change his choreography from when he did it previously. He says, that's what I felt then, that's what I did then, and that's what it is. You know, and I respect that. But I think with theatrical work in this way, that you can always, new ideas are always coming up, you know, and you can incorporate them in. So if it does come back again, you may see a few different things in there, but you never know.
So I am going to stop this, which could go on, and I thought that we would have time for questions, but I'm not sure we do.
I'm sure we've gone over time.
But no, it's been fantastic, and I just want to thank you both so much for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you.
For those of you who have not yet seen Sleeping Beauty, you should rush over and get tickets or call Diane or somebody on the staff. It's through next Sunday. It's fantastic, and I'm just so thrilled to have you both here. Maybe they'll answer a few questions privately. But anyhow,
sure.
Please stay if you'd like to have another drink. And thank you both so much. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks, Arlene. Thank you.
Thank you.